Okay, let's unpack this. Have you ever felt like the world's biggest issues, I don't know, from global justice to what's popping up on your phone, are decided by forces you can't quite grasp? Today, we're diving into the complex and often surprising world of legal authority and enforcement. This deep dive uses a whole stack of sources. We're talking international legal dissertations, court rulings, policy briefs to pull out the key nuggets of knowledge. Our mission, really, is to reveal how similar challenges, power, legitimacy, actually applying rules pop up in areas that seem totally different. It's kind of a shortcut to being truly well-informed.
Yeah, and what's crucial here, I think, is how these discussions, whether you're talking global courts or social media, they always circle back to these fundamental questions of trust and effectiveness. If we kind of zoom out, connect it to the bigger picture, it just shows that understanding how decisions get made and, who actually believes they're legitimate, well, that's critical to understanding our world.
Okay, so let's start with the International Criminal Court, the ICC. It's relatively young, pretty ambitious, an experiment in international law. It was set up to punish and deter the absolute worst crimes: genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity. You can trace its origins back to the Nuremberg trials after World War II, right? That was the first time individuals were really held responsible for state actions. And then it evolved through those ad hoc tribunals, like the ICTY for the former Yugoslavia and the ICTR for Rwanda. They sort of paved the way for a permanent court.
Right. But the fundamental tension, the thing that defines the ICC's struggle, it isn't just about resources, it's this inherent conflict between the ideal of global justice on one hand and the enduring power of national sovereignty on the other. The real insight, I think, is that while the ICC operates like a normal court, it crucially lacks its own police force, no enforcement arm. So that makes it completely reliant on cooperation from sovereign states, which leads to the big question.
Yeah, how can a court enforce its will if it depends on the very same countries it might actually need to prosecute?
Exactly.
And that reliance, that brings us straight to a major sticking point. The ICC's, let's say, problematic relationship with the UN Security Council, the UNSC, particularly its big three permanent members, the US, Russia, and China. They initially opposed some key ICC powers, like the prosecutor initiating investigations independently, and they still hold that veto power.
And you can see this play out so clearly with the Myanmar case. The ICC has no direct jurisdiction over the Rohingya genocide itself because China used its veto in the UNSC. So the ICC had to try this workaround, focusing instead on the crime of forced deportation to Bangladesh. Why? Because that act finished in a member state, Bangladesh. But there's a whole debate now about whether this kind of workaround actually undermines the ICC's legitimacy. Does it look like they're settling for less just to get any conviction?
Right. So even if the ICC does manage to issue an indictment, actually enforcing it, that's where the practical challenges really stack up. Think about Omar al-Bashir, former president of Sudan. He had an ICC indictment for genocide and war crimes, yet he visited various countries without being arrested. It just powerfully shows the difficulty in catching suspects. There are, 15 outstanding warrants right now. And it also highlights that whole complex issue of head of state immunity. Even though Article 27 of the Rome Statute, the court's founding document, says no one is above the law, not even heads of state.
Absolutely. And the African Union's reaction in the al-Bashir case, accusing the ICC of neocolonialism, that points to another major hurdle. You've also got the shifting U.S. stance. Remember the Trump administration saying the ICC is already dead to us. And then there's the double-edged sword of UNSC referrals. Libya and Sudan are the only ones so far. And often these referrals come without the necessary support or aid from the UNSC itself, basically turning the ICC into a kind of, a dumping ground for politically messy situations.
Yeah, it's clear there's this constant push and pull, this tension between immediate stability, peace now, and long-term accountability, justice later. People call it the peace versus justice debate. Syria is such a stark example. Russia and China vetoed UNSC referrals to the ICC again and again, arguing that getting the court involved would just get in the way of peace efforts.
Even though, proponents of justice would argue that peace deals without any accountability are really just short-term fixes.
So, given all that, giving the ICC its own police or sanctioning power, it sounds good, but it's just not realistic, is it?
No, realistically, states aren't going to hand over that much control. A more maybe effective path forward might be for the ICC to embrace this kind of dual identity, be both a legal and a political entity, and really lean into developing the principle of complementarity. That's Article 17. Basically, the ICC acts as a court of last resort. Its job becomes motivating and helping national legal systems prosecute these crimes themselves. It could become more of a source of legal knowledge, a standard setter, rather than trying to handle every single case. That might actually strengthen the ICC by building trust and capacity locally.
Okay, right. Now let's switch gears completely. From global courts, let's turn to the digital world. Content moderation policies, they hold huge power over public discussion.
Oh, absolutely. And for social media platforms, just like for courts, the really crucial factor is perceived legitimacy. If people don't accept their authority to moderate content, well, then following the rules, trusting the platform itself, it all starts to break down.
And here's where it gets really interesting. There was a Stanford study on Facebook's content moderation. They looked at how people felt about 4 different ways of doing it: paid contractors, algorithms, digital juries, and expert panels. And the finding was kind of surprising, wasn't it? Algorithms were seen as the most impartial,
Right, impartial.
but expert panels, they were seen as having the highest overall legitimacy.
It is fascinating, that disconnect. It tells us something important. Users want checks and balances. They want a way to appeal to a human. They want transparency, even with automated systems. And here's the kicker. People tend to see a moderation process as more legitimate when they personally agree with the outcome. That personal agreement factor is huge for public acceptance.
Which brings us neatly to a real-world example, Brazil's recent big Supreme Court ruling. The court basically said part of their 2014 Internet Bill of Rights, the part about platform liability, was unconstitutional. What this means is social media companies can now be held responsible for illegal stuff posted by users without needing a court order first. That's a big shift away from a system like Section 230 in the U.S., which mostly shields platforms. And the context here is key. The old system was seen as failing after repeated attacks on democracy, like the January 8, 2023 events where Bolsonaro supporters stormed government buildings.
So Brazil now faces this really tricky balancing act. How do you incentivize platforms to moderate proactively without opening the door to censorship or political abuse? For instance, if you expand a notice and takedown system like they have for revenge porn under Article 21 to cover broader types of content, well, couldn't politicians then misuse that to get unfavorable stuff taken down, especially around election time? It raises a serious question. Who actually gets to decide what's illegal when the political landscape is shifting so fast?
And just to add another layer of, well, complexity, there's renewed tension with the U.S. government. Secretary of State Marco Rubio hinted at visa restrictions against a specific Brazilian justice, Alexandre de Moraes, because of rulings against U.S. tech companies like X.
Yeah, so ultimately, Brazil's approach is moving closer to the European Union's model. It's putting more pressure on the big tech giants, Google, Meta, TikTok, demanding they actively monitor and remove things like hate speech, racism, incitement to violence. And the companies could be liable if they don't act after a victim notifies them.
Okay, now let's bring this deep dive closer to home. Let's look at the U.S. Supreme Court and how it's reshaping legal challenges and individual rights.
Right. First, let's take the Medina v. Planned Parenthood South Atlantic decision. That was June 26, 2025. The court ruled that people enrolled in Medicaid cannot sue in federal court to enforce the free choice of provider rule.
And the real-world impact of that. It's pretty significant. South Carolina has this policy, and others might follow, barring clinics that also provide abortion care, like Planned Parenthood, from getting Medicaid funding. So patients lose access to essential preventive services, contraception, STI treatment, cancer screenings, things Medicaid would normally cover, even though Medicaid itself doesn't pay for abortions. This could force clinics to close, especially in rural areas, and that affects all patients, not just those on Medicaid.
And the court's reasoning. They basically said the law defines what states must do. It doesn't create an individual right that someone can sue to enforce under a specific civil rights law. They distinguished it from older cases where the law's language explicitly granted individual rights. So it essentially closes off one avenue for people to challenge these state policies in federal court.
Okay, then next, let's look at Trump v. Sursas. That was June 27th, 2025. And here's where it gets really, really interesting. The Supreme Court largely shut down the ability of district courts, those are the lower federal courts, to issue nationwide injunctions. Those were the orders that could block a government action across the entire country. Now, relief is typically just limited to the specific people suing in that one case.
Yeah, and it's really important to be clear here. This ruling did not decide whether Trump's Executive Order 14160 was constitutional or not. That's the order seeking to strip birthright citizenship from children born in the U.S. if their parents are undocumented or on temporary visas. Instead, the ruling focused purely on the scope of judicial power, how far-reaching a lower court's order can be.
So what are the direct consequences for you? Well, that birthright citizenship executive order is set to take effect July 27th, 2025. And this ruling means it could create a real patchwork system where it's enforced differently depending on the state or court district. It raises the risk of kids being denied citizenship or maybe even being left stateless.
And broadening that out, what these rulings really signal is a major shift in how judicial power works. It's moving away from these broad system-wide fixes towards a much more fragmented sort of case-by-case approach to rights and challenging government actions. It basically makes it easier for the executive branch to just, give it a try with potentially unlawful policies because getting them blocked immediately everywhere is now much harder. And this affects employers too, right? They used to benefit from nationwide injunctions blocking things like EEO-1 reporting rules, work, visa changes, vaccine mandates, non-compete bans. Now they might have to fight those battles individually, court by court.
Okay, finally, let's explore how legal systems try to handle accountability when it comes to corporate actions, specifically pharmaceutical safety.
Yeah, we're talking about some pretty alarming findings related to Pfizer's Depo-Provera. That's a contraceptive injection used by a lot of women. A very recent study, just out June 29th, 2025, found that using Depo-Provera for over a year is linked to a 3.5 times increased risk of developing a specific type of brain tumor, an intracranial meningioma. And this just reinforces an earlier study from 2024 that found an even higher risk, like 5.6 times higher.
And Pfizer is facing a lot of legal heat over this, over 550 lawsuits now in the U.S. The allegation is that the company knew about this potential link, but didn't adequately warn women in the U.S., and that number of lawsuits has jumped quite a bit recently.
What's really striking, though, is the inconsistency across the globe in safety warnings. It's almost like different countries got different memos. Pfizer added warnings about this brain tumor risk in Canada way back in 2015, then the UK and Europe in October 2024, South Africa in February 2025, but not in the United States. It highlights a real disparity in how risk information gets shared globally.
And just for a bit of history, Depo-Provera wasn't even originally meant as a contraceptive. It was developed for cancer treatment. Its use as a contraceptive actually got denied multiple times by the FDA between 1978 and 1992 because of safety concerns. It only got approved here in 92. Plus, there are reports the FDA has refused Freedom of Information Act requests for its communications with Pfizer about label changes, citing trade secrets, even though Pfizer apparently mentioned some of those documents in court filings.
Yeah, it really puts a spotlight on how the legal process tries to uncover potential harm, especially when maybe information is being held back or warnings just aren't consistent from place to place. It shows that ongoing struggle for transparency, and for accountability in corporate practices.
So, okay, what does this all actually mean? We've looked at challenges to authority on completely different scales, haven't we? From the ICC trying to achieve global justice, to the fight over birthright citizenship right here in the U.S., regulating online speech in Brazil, and this fight for pharmaceutical accountability.
Right. And if you connect those threads, what becomes clear is that in every single one of these arenas, there's this constant tension, often messy, between power and accountability. The ability of institutions, courts, platforms, governments, whatever, to effectively enforce rules and maintain their legitimacy, it all hangs on this really delicate balance. It depends on the hard realities of power, the complexities of politics, and maybe most critically, on whether you, the public, see what they're doing as fair and just.
Yeah, this deep dive has definitely shown us that the rules aren't fixed. They're always being tested, interpreted, sometimes completely rewritten. It's a really dynamic landscape where the fight for justice, for effective governance, is just ongoing.
So maybe here's a provocative thought to leave you with. As technology and, global interconnectedness keep challenging our old ideas about sovereignty and authority, what new forms of accountability are going to emerge, and how are we as societies going to decide which rules actually matter, and crucially, who gets to enforce them?
Keep asking those questions. Keep digging. And keep seeking those aha moments.